help us to bow down our ears and hearts. Pray that you'll be with our pastor as he brings forth your word. Pray your blessings at this time. Yes, for Christ. Your honor, Lord.
Amen. You may be seated. Open your Bibles with me, please, to Hebrews chapter 11. We'll be looking at the same 3 verses that we did last week. We want to add an element, I think, of encouragement to the power of faith. We've been looking at, for the last many weeks, the power of faith. The enabling power of faith. We've tried to emphasize, for example, verse 4, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice. By faith, verse 5, Enoch was translated. By faith, Noah, being warned of God, moved with fear, built an ark. Faith enables individuals to serve God acceptably. Faith enables men and women, and again, ordinary, normal, everyday men and women, to do things that they couldn't normally do. And to, what we're going to look at tonight, the faith that frees us from so many earthly struggles. The songwriter wrote about the deliverance from Egypt. Lord, you took me out of Egypt. Now take Egypt out of me. The songwriter captures in that lyric a truth that you and I have to struggle with. That while you have saved me, Lord, I still struggle in this flesh, with this flesh. And the children of Israel, while they were leaving Israel or Egypt, they were complaining about leaving Egypt. And as soon as they got away from Egypt a little ways and they got out into the desert, they were complaining that they didn't have some of the niceties that was in Egypt. And faith can free you from some of those earthly struggles, some of those fleshly struggles. So we want to look at the same verse 24 through 27, 4 verses. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt. And that's the root of, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. This faith to follow the Lord and get out of Egypt and lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And then the ongoing struggle to get Egypt out of them. And you and I live in that struggle on a daily basis. You and I have to work at this. And the minute that we think we've got it settled, we've come to a place where we've got it all settled and we let our guard down, that's the minute we have trouble. Back up with me to an overview that Stephen gives us of this in Acts chapter 7. There's some aspects that we want to bring out, and he brings it out in such a concise manner. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen just before his martyrdom, uses a history of Israel, gives us a history of Israel, and he along the way he touches on this. And in verse 22, it helps put into perspective. We could find all those things in the book of Exodus, and we could go back and relate. But Stephen does such a good job of putting an overview on it. In verse 22, and Moses was learned in all Egypt. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds. Moses, and you remember, he was raised by the daughter of Pharaoh. He was raised in the center of the powers, the corridors of power in Egypt. You would have thought he had at his disposal any advancement, any resource he wanted. He was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, known for their advanced learning. He was trained with the best, educated with the elite. He was mighty in words and deeds. He could have, under regular circumstances, been a man that was going places, quote unquote. He was groomed for greatness. He could have, and I wonder, and I can't say for sure, but I wonder if that's not part of what got him in trouble when he was 40, and he knew that he was going to be leading the children of Israel out. He had that part right. We'll read this in a minute. He thought that they would know that he was going to lead the children of Israel out. His mistake seems to be that his timing was off. But he was mighty in word and deed. He was, I don't know if this is overstating him, but he could have been a rising star. The son of Pharaoh's daughter, or at least the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. And he was 40 years old. He was in his prime. He could have been a very highly sought after commodity in a lot of different realms in the Egyptian kingdom. And maybe he thought that. Maybe he, I do this all the time, but maybe he thought that. And I am that. Verse 23 through 25 here, when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. He got ahead of God. His timing was off, at very least. He might have thought, God has prepared me for this moment. Well, he's prepared me for this thing, but he got the moment wrong. And he ended up, of course, spending another 40 years in God's training camp, taking care of sheep on the backside of the desert. Look at verse 30. Verse 29, then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And when 40 years were expired, so now he's been 40 years away from Egypt, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in the flame of a fire in a bush. And look at verse 34. He said, I have seen the affliction of my people. God speaking. I have seen the affliction of my people, which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and I am come to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee, God talking to Moses, I will send thee into Egypt. And so, Moses, by faith, and our text in Hebrews tells us, Moses, by faith, got a lot right. By faith, he forsook Egypt. But it took some mistakes along the way, and I want to demonstrate in this message some of the things that faith can free us from. And in this case, we'll start with Moses learned everything about the Egyptian culture and the Egyptian knowledge base at that time, the inner workings of the Egyptian regime, that just everything about it. Moses was mighty in words and deeds. But he had to go back to God's school of higher learning, get alone with God, take care of sheep, contemplate God. Contemplate, I mean, he would have had to have contemplated, I got it wrong, I got the timing wrong, maybe he thought he was altogether wrong. But what this would free him from, at least in part, a freedom from the delusion of self-centered confidence, that self-centered control of circumstances, that I've got this. He went out on that, being a young, strapping 40-year-old guy, mighty in words and deeds, full of spit and vinegar, full of self-confidence. You got it wrong. And the faith that taught Moses and enabled Moses to forsake Egypt is a faith that will have some very positive extra benefits, if you will. That he was able to be freed from a self-confidence, a self-centered confidence. I don't mind a proper level of self-confidence, a comfortableness that I know what the Lord would have me do, and I know this is where He would have me to do it, and I know that this is when and how and all those things, and I can go with some of that. But Moses didn't have those things. He had run ahead of the Lord. His timing was wrong, and the Lord reminded him, I'm in control. I'm in charge of the timetable and of the details. And so now he's had 40 years. In Exodus chapter 3, he sees the burning bush, and he's like, whoa, what is this? And he moves in a little closer to see, and the Lord said, put off thy shoes from off thy feet. The place you're standing is holy ground. He realizes he's having an encounter with God. God tells him, I'm going to take you back to Egypt, and I'm going to have you lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And you remember Moses' response in Exodus chapter 3, I think it's verse 11. His response is, who am I? 40 years earlier it was, look at me. I'm ready to do this. Let me take care of this guy, and let me defend my fellow Hebrew, and we'll get the children of Israel out of here. He went about it wrong, in wrong timing. But he was now free from the delusion of self-centered confidence. And he was free from pride. He was free from an abundance of pride. He was a humble man before God, and he tells God, Exodus 3, like I said, I think it's verse 11, who am I? Did you see what I did? I mean, do you know the mistakes I made? You're sending me? I thought that ship sailed. Who am I? So we're going to see in our text, in Hebrews 11, I believe with the Lord's help, a realization of some of the things that faith enables. And some of the things faith frees one from. So we're back to chapter 11 and verse 24. Moses, in verse 24, chooses God over the woman that raised him, Moses, Pharaoh's son. And the Bible puts it this way: by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Moses, by faith, chose God over this daughter of Pharaoh that raised him, gave him unbelievable access to education and knowing the right people, and as I said before, in the center of the corridors of the power structure of Egypt. And he could have been a mover and a shaker. He could have just been this rising star. And he chose, by faith, he chose, verse 24, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather, verse 25. So he chose God, and to serve God, and to do it God's way over the woman that raised him and gave him so much advantage. So it's by faith he identified himself with God over the people that had raised him, the people that had given him so many benefits, given him, in a very real sense, life, spared his life. What we have then in this, we've already seen that Moses was, by faith, enabled to be freed from the delusion of self-centered confidence and pride. And that's something all of us could struggle with. We, to varying degrees, especially depending on our temperaments and personalities, we may struggle with that self-centered confidence. And here he's freed in verse 24. We're going to call it the freedom from the pull of sentimental ties. And everybody can struggle with sentimental ties. By faith, Moses was freed from that. And I'm taking this from the standpoint of, like Paul did in Romans 6, where in Romans 6 he talks about the child of God that is saved and free from sin. Sin is still there. We in this flesh, we will, as long as we're in this flesh, struggle with sin. As long as we're in this body, we struggle against remaining sin. But the overwhelming dominance of that sin, the child of God can be freed from. The overwhelming servitude that you see in lost people that are still under that dominance of sin. They're living under the rule of the god of this world. The Lord calls it the prince or the power of the air, Satan. And you can see men and women in the grip. They live their lives in self-destructive manners. And I've talked to many a person and tried to reason with them and say, do you not see the direction your life is going? If you continue in this lifestyle or this practice or this endeavoring or involving yourself in this sin, do you not see where this is leading you? Yes, I do see where this is. Then stop. I can't. It's got me. And faith can free you from so many things that you struggle with. And that's the goal of this today, is to bring to your attention some of these things. The faith that Moses had to just trust God. And he had to learn a lot of that. He was well versed and mighty in word and deed. But he had to go tend sheep. And he had to get away from Egypt. And God had to get Egypt out of Moses. And then he was free from the delusion of self-centered confidence and overabundance of pride. Things that you and I can struggle with. And he was free from, verse 24, the sentiment and the sentimental. I've seen sentiment and sentimental tendencies take people in directions they would not go. But through sentimentality, they're just driven in this direction. And Moses could have gone all mushy about, this woman raised me. She gave me life. I mean, I would have been dead. She gave me life. I mean, look at it. She not only gave me life, look at the life she gave me. How can I go against that? Well, Moses, it's her or God. There's your choice. Now, that's not an unbelievable choice if you think about what the Lord said in Luke 14. In Luke 14, the demand of discipleship is, you have to follow me over mom, dad, son, daughter, brother, sister. What? When I surrendered to the ministry, and it really is a surrender. It takes the Lord getting you to that point. And I didn't argue with the Lord. I didn't struggle with it a long time, but it took me a little while to get that assurance. And once I had that assurance, that's it. I started announcing that I felt like that's what the Lord would have me do. And people began to come out of the woodwork. You can't do that. You can't quit your job. You can't pack up your family and move 1,000 miles away. You can't do these kinds of things. Why? And one of the people that struggled against me the most was my mom. You can't do this. You can't do this to me. You can't do this to us. Mom, it's you or the Lord. And it's hard to take sides that way. It's hard when she's looking at you and saying, you can't do this. And I had been put in a position where it was, obey mom, at 30 years old, or obey the Lord. And I knew this is what the Lord wanted me to do. And Moses, to maybe a far greater extent, could have struggled with sentimentality, thinking about what Moses, Pharaoh's daughter, gave him. And yet he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. I'm not going to move under the skirt tails of the woman that raised me. I'm not going to exploit my relationship with her. In fact, I'm going to relinquish it. And I'm going, because God has called me to lead the children of Israel out. And so Moses has been freed by faith, the enabling power of faith, to free him from pride. That if men let that pride get out of control, they do silly things. And run off headlong and not ready. because I got this, and run ahead of the Lord. And by faith, Moses was freed from that. Verse 25, Moses chose suffering affliction with the people of God over sinful pleasure, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. And I said last week, the position that Moses had and the choices that were in front of Moses were not choices between gross immorality and morality. It wasn't like that. It wasn't the choice of hardcore sin in immorality versus following the Lord. It was the choice of being in the will of God or not being in the will of God. Am I going to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season? And there is pleasure in sin. That's the unfortunate reality that you and I live in. But it is only for a season. It is the reality that we live in. But he chose by faith rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. And what would have made it sin was that he was out of the will of God. He would have been outside the will of God had he kept his allegiance to the royal family. He would have been outside the will of God. And yet all kinds of human arguments could have been made. Moses, you can make more inroads. You can have more influence if you stay on the inside. Moses, you're thinking about this all wrong. He's only got to think about it one way. And you and I only have to think about life one way. What does God want? What does he want? With me. Where does he want me? And how does he want me to do it? And when does he want? That's the kind of thing. The singular question. What does God want? And by faith, Moses chose to suffer affliction. In other words, he was free from the grip of sensual pleasure. He was free from the grip of earthly pleasures. He's freed from the grip of my will. This is what I want. By faith, we can have freedom from things that we struggle with. If we look to God in faith and rest in his word and follow his leadership. Verse 26, Moses chose tough times serving God over temporal security, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. He could see, and we brought this out last week, he could see the eternal consequence. He could see past the temporary, the temporal. He considered the reproach of Christ greater riches. So now we see him being free from the bondage of temporal treasures. The things that we do for monetary gain or monetary security. The things that we do, the things that keep us awake at night, the things that move us to feel secure. And I'm not disparaging planning ahead and preparing for our futures. I'm not talking about that being a bad thing. But he saw the recompense of the reward. He had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Egypt had a lot to offer. Egypt had a lot of security to offer, especially to the son of Pharaoh's daughter. But he saw past all that by faith. By faith, he was free from those things. And what he saw was God's reward, God's treasure. And the culmination of this is given to us in verse 27. Moses chose the new life over the old life in Egypt. By faith, he forsook Egypt. By faith, he forsook Egypt. Yeah, I mean, just from the practical standpoint, you let that sink in and you say, wow. Turned his back on Egypt. Turned his back on the woman that gave him life, or preserved it at very least. Turned his back on the very people that gave him every advantage in life for the first 40 years of his life. And by faith was freed from all of the sentiment and freed from the pride that might have went along with his upbringing at the time, freed from so many things. Freedom from the security that offered. And forsook Egypt. Not fearing the wrath of the king. Not to be understated, underestimated. The wrath of a monarch that would have power of life and death. And especially one who had been kind of proverbially slapped in the face. I saw to it that you had this. I made sure that my daughter gave you that. You had at your access every amenity known to man at the time, and this is how you treat me. And so now the wrath of the king could have been heightened. And by faith, Moses was able to walk away from all the things that we've been describing. He forsook Egypt, free from the wrath of the king, not fearing the wrath of the king. How many things do we do motivated by some sort of fear or another? I mean, fear of disapproval from someone, fear of retaliation from someone. How many things do we do regularly that is motivated by some sort of fear? And this passage tells us that by faith there can be freedom from those things. Freedom from the wrath of the king. And in that situation, that's not your mom mad at you. She's not going to pull out the execution card. The king might. And the king could. Not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Moses was free from the disabling fear of the king. So we've identified several different things, and I'm sure that people could from here go on. But there's so many parallels, and the situation that Moses was in and the choices that he has before him have so many parallels in everyday life. In our struggles with the flesh after the Lord saves us, our struggle with the world. Egypt in the Bible is often a picture of the world. Our struggles with these things that go on. And it's a question of who's first in my life. The Lord or what I want. the Lord or what my family wants. The Lord or temporal security, earthly pleasures. And the faith that enabled Moses to stand up and say, I've got to serve God. The faith that enabled Moses to forsake Egypt, even in the very real possibility that the king is going to get incredibly angry with him. And yet this faith frees us from these things. And that is a ongoing process in our lives. It never ends. We never get to the plateau where I've got it figured out now. And even Moses' life, especially as he was going toe-to-toe with Pharaoh, is so illustrative of our lives. He was called upon by God, back in Exodus chapter 5, to go and meet Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh what the Lord had said and start the process of getting the children of Israel out of Egypt. And the immediate response of Pharaoh is many times the immediate response you and I will get when we try to serve the Lord, when we try to obey the Lord. No. People will try to stop you. The adversary will try to stop you. Pharaoh immediately said, no. Moses, chapter 5, verse 1, afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And this is the stated reason why they were leaving. To hold a feast for God in the wilderness, unto God in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And they said, the God of the Hebrews had met with us. Let us go, we pray thee, 3 days' journey into the desert, and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with a sword. And the king of Egypt said unto them, wherefore do ye, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works get you unto your burdens. I mean, the first answer is just no. The first answer is you can't do that. And the adversary, that's where he'll have people many times as they try to serve the Lord. No. They'll just try to stop you. And if you dig your heels in and try to serve the Lord, then they're going to come up with compromises. And we'll see that in a minute. But Moses was free, as we've tried to demonstrate, from so many things that's common in our human experience. He was, by faith in God, free from Pharaoh's no. No. Really? No. You're going to tell God no. And Moses knows that God's going to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. And he's free from worrying about Pharaoh's no. First of all, God told him Pharaoh's going to say no. I mean, it's kind of an interesting showdown. Moses goes in there knowing that the answer is going to be no. And you and I can take it to the bank, as they say. when you really get serious, when we really get serious about trying to serve the Lord and put Him first, there are going to be those in the realm of that say, no. And here's a lot of reasons why you can't. And they'll give you sentimental reasons. They'll give you earthly confidence reasons, earthly security, financial security, whatever kind of security. They'll give you all kinds of reasons. No. And that's exactly what Moses and Aaron got. But they were free from that. They were free from the bondage of that because they knew God was bigger. They weren't biting their nails now saying, what do we do? Pharaoh said no. They knew he was going to say no. So what ensues then after that? Well, Pharaoh tells them to get to work, and they up the tally that they were supposed to make, and they increase the amount that the children of Israel are supposed to produce, and they take away some of the advantages, and at the same time of taking away some of the advantages, they tell them to increase the output. And Moses says, listen, here's the bottom line. God said, let the people of Israel out of Egypt. We've got to go, verse 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice unto the Lord. So the children of Israel in total have to go 3 days out of Egypt, and they have to sacrifice unto the Lord, so they need their flocks. Pharaoh immediately begins to start throwing at Moses compromises. I think the first one, or one of the very first ones, is, okay, go make your sacrifice. You can read this in chapter 8 and verse 25. Go make your sacrifice in the land. It seems plausible. And I've always made this case that at this point Moses is already beginning to be labeled as a narrow-minded old man. He told Pharaoh what God told him to say. And what God told him to say was, all the people, 3 days' journey, make sacrifice, so I'm going to need my flocks. There are 3 key components. All the people, 3 days sacrifice, and I need my flocks. So, the first thing he comes up with, go ahead and make your sacrifice unto your God, but do it in the land. And some will come to you in those circumstances. That's reasonable. That's fair. Meet him halfway. I know God said thus and thus, but Pharaoh's being reasonable. And Moses says, no. Because God said these 3 components were required. All the people leave. They go 3 days' journey. So they're out of the camp of Egypt. And they make sacrifice, so they need their flocks. So Pharaoh tries, make sacrifice unto the Lord in the land. And Moses is free from the propensity to compromise. No, that's not what God said. In Exodus chapter 8 and verse 28, he says, all right, okay, go make your sacrifice, but don't go too far. I'll paraphrase it. Just go outside, a little bit. Don't be extreme. Don't take it too far. And someone comes along and says, Moses, come on, man. They're making us work even harder. Just take the compromise. And Moses is free from the propensity to compromise with minimizing what God said. By faith, he says, no, I'm not going to do that. And in Exodus chapter 10 and verse 7, He said, let the adults go. Keep the children here. Anybody that's my age, anybody that's got a little age on them, realize how fast kids grow up. And one of Pharaoh's key compromise offers was, let the adults go. That's fine. I'll keep the kids. Because in 2 blinks of an eye, they're going to be adults, and I've got them. And Pharaoh says, here's the offer, Moses. And Moses, by faith, is continuing to be free from the propensity to compromise? No. That's not what God said. 3 days journey. Well, my people leave Egypt. They go 3 days journey. They make sacrifice unto the Lord. And the next compromise, of course, you know what's going on in the middle of all this. God is sending plagues to directly attack the gods of Egypt. He's sending plagues that pinpoint their weaknesses, their inabilities. And so Pharaoh is becoming more and more ready to deal. But yet the hardness of his heart won't let him just obey God. And then in Exodus chapter 10, verse 24, okay, all the people can go, but you can't take your flocks and herds. Let the people out of Egypt. That's fine. Let them go 3 days, whatever. But leave me your flocks and herds. And again now, Moses has got no doubt somebody saying, or at least thinking, Moses, now you're being a narrow-minded old man. He's given you reasonable counter-offers. There's no reason to be nitpicky about this. It is, in fact, only, after all, the Word of God. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. Moses takes this offer also and says, no. Your experience and mine may be a lot like this. There will be those that immediately tell you you can't. And if you dig your heels in and say, I can, and I will, they will say, okay, but don't get too extreme. Don't go too far. Don't do all this to the exclusion of that. They'll throw compromises in your path. The dealing of Pharaoh with Moses is very illustrative of the way the world will treat you and me. And Moses was free from that propensity to compromise and freed from quitting, caving, and compromising. And it's by faith. And so I wanted today to just be an encouragement that by faith, you and I can serve the Lord, being freed from some of the paralyzing struggles that can go along with serving the Lord. Some of the very difficult choices that you and I have to make. Some of the things that we lose sleep over, trying to figure out how to serve the Lord and how to make this person happy at the same time when they're going in two different directions. How to serve the Lord and get what I want. I mean, there's always that element. And by faith, there can be so much freedom from so many of those things. You just look to the Lord in confidence and trust Him. Have the humility that comes from seeing who the Lord is. Moses saw who the Lord was in those 40 years in the backside of the desert. And it humbled him. He freed him from that pride. And there's always a danger of getting so specific and naming so many things that I didn't land on the one that bothers you. But I hope that you can see there are so many struggles that you and I have, and that's common to the human experience, that we can be free from. They don't have to have the dominance in our lives that many times they do. If by faith we will just look to the Lord. Follow Him, follow His leadership, follow His timing, and rest in Him. So as we go out into the rest of this work, well, as we start this work week, may God encourage us. Take Moses as an example. He's written in Hebrews 11 for that reason. And continue on serving the Lord with even more confidence. Just looking to Him by faith. Let's stand.